Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, we'll talk about the Cy Young voting and MVP voting, both of which are done now and neither of which was won by Dodgers. Plus, we'll talk about the upcoming Rule 5 draft and the fact that minor leaguers no longer have to sleep on the floor. So, a lot to do, so let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. I am Jeff Snider of Baseball Essential, and this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Vince and I are doing a split episode, so he will be with you for the second half of this show. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. As I said at the top, we got some awards voting to talk about. I'm going to talk about the Cy Young voting. Vince, in a little while, will talk about the MVP voting. And then I'm going to talk about the upcoming Rule 5 draft. And Vince is going to talk about minor leaguers no longer having to sleep on floors. So that's the plan for today. So I'm just going to jump right in. First, I guess I want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day and encourage you to subscribe or follow wherever you get podcasts and or on YouTube because we like talking to you. So the Cy Young Award in the National League, we don't care so much about the American League. It was won by Robbie Ray, which is probably the right call. National League was a lot trickier, and I don't know that there was a right answer. There were some wrong answers, and I don't think the voters got it wrong. But I'm not sure that they got it right. Corbin Burns won, and then Zach Wheeler came in second, Max Scherzer in third, Walker Buehler in fourth, Brandon Woodruff in fifth. Julio was down in seventh, tied for seventh with Adam Wainwright. Mostly I want to talk about those top four: Burns, Wheeler, Scherzer, and Buehler. You know, Corbin Burns led the major leagues in ERA. He had the best, and an ERA plus. He had an outstanding FIP. His FIP was even better than his ERA. His FIP was 163 compared to his 243 ERA, which means that he actually maybe had some bad luck, or at least he underperformed his FIP. FIP is fielding independent pitching. If you're not familiar, quick summary, it basically just looks at things the pitcher can control, which according to their definition is walks, strikeouts, and home runs. And he had a lot of strikeouts, 234 strikeouts in only 167 innings. He only walked 34 guys, and he only allowed 7 home runs all season. So his FIP was sparkling. The big argument against Corbin Burns, and the reason why I'm not sure if I would have voted for Burns, is because he only threw 167 innings, which was by far the fewest of those top four. If you look at innings pitched, he threw 167. Next lowest was Max Scherzer with 179 and a third. Then Buehler with 207 and 2/3, and Wheeler with 213 and a third. And so Burns and Scherzer were both significantly below Wheeler and Buehler in innings pitched. And the reason that matters or can matter is if you look at 167 innings that Burns threw. Well, after 169 innings this year, Max Scherzer had a 2.08 ERA. Now, he didn't have the sparkling FIP that Burns had, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But Scherzer's ERA, if he had stopped his season after his start on September 18th, he would have finished the season with a 2.08 ERA and had 2 more innings pitched than Corbin Burns. Now, do we know that Corbin Burns would have allowed 10 earned runs in 10 1/3 innings if he had thrown 10 1/3 more innings the way that Scherzer did? We don't know that. And it's probably not even likely that he would have. But the fact is that you never know what's going to happen, and you can't give an award based on what we think might have happened. And so it's a legitimate argument that the fact that Scherzer had better numbers, better raw numbers anyway, than Burns at the same point in their season. And the only difference is Scherzer pitched 10 1/3 more innings and kind of struggled in those innings. That's basically, it's a pretty strong argument against giving it to Burns over Scherzer. Walker Buehler, even more so. Walker Buehler, after 169 innings, had a 2.02 ERA. And then he threw almost 30 more innings after that. And so, and he was just he had a couple clunker starts again, and so if he had stopped after August 25th, he would have had 2 more innings pitched than Burns and a much better ERA. Again, not the same sparkling FIP, but, I guess it's a good time for me to talk about FIP. For me, FIP is kind of useful there's a lot of stats that are useful for predicting how good a guy is going to be next year. And I think those are important. But when you get down to giving an award for how did a guy do this season, I think some of these raw numbers, the actual things that happened, like for example, here's a simple example. If you have 2 guys pitching, one guy strikes out 5, allows 0 runs and throws a no-hitter. And the other guy strikes out 13 and allows 7 runs. The no-hitter guy, let's say he walked 2 guys. And then the other guy strikes out 13, allows 7 runs and doesn't walk anybody and doesn't give up any home runs. Just, say he gives up 13 hits and 7 runs. Well, that second guy would have a much better FIP for that game because he had more strikeouts, fewer walks, and the same number of homers. But I think everybody would agree the guy who threw the no-hitter pitched better in that game, even though, the FIP doesn't say so. So that's just kind of an extreme example to show that FIP doesn't always necessarily mean anything. And so when you're looking at over the course of a season, things are going to balance out, things are going to happen. And at the end of the day, the award for Cy Young Award is who pitched the best, not, and so I can see making a case that it shouldn't include FIP because FIP is a magical number based on specific things. But, in the end, the goal of a pitcher is to not allow runs. And, that's reflected by ERA better than FIP. Now, ERA is a blunt tool too. And, so I guess my main point here is that you can make a case for all these guys. Then we'll talk about Zach Wheeler, who finished in second. He only had, 213 innings, so less than 6 more innings pitched than Walker Buehler, had a significantly worse ERA, had a lot more strikeouts, so therefore a better FIP. But all in all, I don't understand giving it to I don't understand how Wheeler finished ahead of Buehler except it's just based on strikeouts. And so, and again, when you're looking at Cy Young Award, for me, it's like, well, how many outs did he get? How good was he at getting outs? Not how did he get the outs? And if you're looking at who do you want for next year? Well, yeah, the guy who had more strikeouts is probably, probably technically a better pitcher, but that doesn't mean he had the better season, if that makes sense. And it's splitting hairs, but mostly I think my main opinion on this whole thing is that you could have voted for any of those top 4 guys and not had the wrong answer. And it's pretty much reflected in, if you want, there's a lot of blocky ink for all those guys, Scherzer led the league in WHIP, which is really important. That's base runners. Burns led in ERA and ERA plus. Wheeler led in WAR and innings pitched and strikeouts. Buehler led in starts and was second in a lot of those other things, innings pitched. So you could have made a case for any of these guys, and ultimately the voters voted for Burns. It was pretty darn close, and all in all, he got 151 points. Wheeler got 141. Scherzer got 113. Buehler 70. They didn't get it wrong. I don't think I would have voted for Corbin Burns. I think Corbin Burns was the best pitcher. I don't think he pitched enough innings for my liking to be able to say he deserves the award for best pitcher. Jacob deGrom finished 9th. Jacob deGrom was better than Burns, but he only threw 92 innings. So obviously he wasn't going to win, although relief pitchers have won. It's funny, if Jacob deGrom was a relief pitcher who threw 92 innings with a 108 ERA, he probably would have won, but instead he was a starter who got hurt partway through the season. So it is what it is, but all in all, not a bad result on the voting. Like I said, Vince is going to talk about the MVP voting that also didn't have any Dodgers anywhere near the top of the list, and which wasn't a surprise. We knew there were no Dodgers in the finalists, but he's going to talk more about that later. I'm going to come back in a second. I'm going to talk about the upcoming Rule 5 drafts, so keep it locked on Dodgers. I love Thanksgiving. You can tell by looking at me that I love Thanksgiving. I'm a big fan of the food, and it's kind of funny, we talk about when we're talking about Built Bar, we talk about how you can use Built Bar to replace some of these desserts, some of these pies. And for me, the only pie I eat is chocolate pie. I don't like these, pumpkin pie. No, thank you. Apple pie, meh, it's fine, but I wouldn't choose to eat it. I like chocolate French silk pie, and I make really good chocolate French silk pie. Well, guess what? Every Built Bar has real chocolate on it. So it's like a straight up, you can really enjoy that. The cookie dough chunk Built Bar, if you told me you can't have a slice of the pie, but you can have 2 or 3 of those, I'd be like, okay, that sounds great. All the Built Bars are low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein. And like I said, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. So whether it's Thanksgiving or just because you're hungry, you want a snack, go to grab a Built Bar. It's going to be delicious. They're having surprises all month over at built.com. They're going to have limited time flavors arriving regularly. So check the site often. Also Black Friday, they say there's nothing like a Built Bar Black Friday. I'm excited to see what it is. So mark your calendar. Black Friday will be a huge event with all sorts of surprises. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, I'm back. And coming up, the Dodgers today, as you're listening to this on Friday, they have to set their 40-man roster in preparation for the Rule 5 draft. And a quick primer on, a primer is supposed to be pronounced primer, but I'm not going to say primer. That sounds snooty. So I'm going to say primer. Quick primer on how the Rule 5 draft works. Basically, any player who was, if a player was signed before he was 19, and he's been in the system for 5 years, or if he was signed after he was 19 and he's been in the system for 4 years, he has to either be on the 40-man roster or he's eligible for the Rule 5 draft. In the Rule 5 draft, any team can take any guy who's eligible for the draft and isn't on a team's 40-man roster, with the caveat that that player has to stay on their major league roster the whole next season, or they have to give him back. And so, a few years ago, the Padres had a year when they had like 3 Rule 5 draft picks on their major league roster the whole year. They knew they were going to be bad. And so they just grabbed these guys in the Rule 5 who weren't ready for the big leagues, but they wanted them in their system. So they grabbed them in the Rule 5, kept them on their roster all year, and then sent them back to the minors. I think Luis Torrens was one of them, who's now with the Mariners. I feel like anyway, I can't remember who all they were, but there's a lot of these guys that they've grabbed in the Rule 5 draft. And you see teams do that all the time. And the Dodgers this year, it seems like more than usual. I don't know. I haven't compared it to previous years, but the Dodgers have 49 guys who are potentially eligible for the Rule 5 draft this year. So they have to make decisions on all 49 of these guys. Obviously, there's not room on the 40-man roster for, definitely not for all 49 of them, and realistically only for a couple, because the Dodgers 40-man roster is mostly full, and, they're planning on adding some people this offseason. And so it's going to be a tricky thing. And so if you look at the list, there's some names that people have heard, especially if you're a Dodgers prospect hound. Hunter Fiducia, it's kind of interesting. He's a catcher. We actually might have him on the podcast later this offseason. He's actually probably the Dodgers' third catcher right now, because the Dodgers don't have any catchers in AAA. And so, basically it's Will Smith and Austin Barnes, and then probably Hunter Fiducia right now. He's eligible. So he's one that wouldn't be surprising to see him protected. Other guys, prospect hounds might have heard of Jacob Amaya, Horbit Vivas, Devin Mann, Omar Estevez. I'm just going down the list for some of these bigger names. James Outman, who we saw quite a bit in spring training. He had a good season this year. Ryan Noda, who came over in the Ross Stripling trade. Jaron Kendall, who used to be a pretty big prospect. Michael Grove, Yadier Alvarez, Marshall Kasowski. A lot of these guys are eligible. And, when you look at the thing that teams have to think about is, when you know that you have to keep a guy on the major league roster for the whole year, one just practical thing, it's a lot easier to do that with a relief pitcher or a backup catcher. And that's what the Padres did a couple of years ago. If I remember right, it was 2 relief pitchers or 2 pitchers who they could use as relief pitchers, and then Torrens, who was a backup catcher. I wish I could remember who the other Padres guys were, but I don't care enough to actually look it up. So, and so some of these guys who you're thinking about, like, a guy like, Jacob Amaya. He's a good player, but is he ready for the big leagues? Probably not. And more to the point, you don't want to mess up his development by sitting him on your bench in the major leagues all season when he needs to be developing in the minors. And so that makes it, I think that goes into the calculus that teams have a lot when they're deciding who to protect is, okay, a position player isn't likely to be taken. Now, a guy like Michael Grove or Marshall Kasowski even, these pitchers who, we could pitch him in relief, bring him in and mop up duty, work with them in between appearances, and you can get a lot of development from a relief pitcher, even if he has to be in the big leagues for a year. And so it's, I'm not smart enough. I'm smart enough. I don't know enough about Dodgers prospects and prospects in general to say who I think the Dodgers are going to protect. I'm looking for reference here. I'm looking at our buddy from Future Dodgers over on futuredodgers.wordpress.com has an article about this, listing all 49 players and who he thinks the Dodgers are likely to protect. And this is, he says, in likelihood of them being picked, he has 6 guys listed: James Outman, Eddie Leonard, Michael Grove, Jacob Amaya, Horbit Vivas, and Guillermo Zuniga. The Dodgers don't have room to protect all 6 of those guys. And like I say, James Outman, he's one of those guys who he wouldn't surprise me. One thing that we've seen with the Dodgers is pretty much everybody on their 40-man roster ends up playing in the big leagues that year. And so James Outman, I don't know that he is ready to be a contributor at the big league level. And I don't know that the Dodgers are going to be that concerned that he's going to be picked in the Rule 5 draft, but I'm sure they really like him quite a bit. And so, it's going to be interesting. I expect that they might be more aggressive on a guy like Michael Grove, who's a pitcher, or even Guillermo Zuniga, who's a big, hard-throwing pitcher who a lot of teams could use a guy like Zuniga and could hide him in the minor leagues, in the bullpen in the major leagues to qualify that, to meet that qualification for Rule 5 draft. So it's going to be interesting. By this afternoon, we're going to know who the Dodgers did add to their 40-man roster. And that is, it's exciting in a way. It's exciting for the players because a lot of these guys, either they're getting added to the 40-man roster, which is exciting, or they might get picked in the Rule 5 draft, which is exciting too, because that means they're going to the big leagues. And so either way, they're going to be on somebody's 40-man roster, unless, it's the guys who the Dodgers don't protect and then they don't get drafted, and that's, then they're just eligible again the next year, and maybe they pop up at some point. So Rule 5 draft is really interesting if you enjoy that sort of thing. And there's a lot that goes into these decisions other than just how good a ball player is this guy, or even how much do we like this guy? Because, it's all about doing the math of, okay, how likely do we think this guy is to get picked? Last year, Dodgers didn't protect Jordan Sheffield or Brett DeGuss. They both got taken in the Rule 5 draft and both ended up pitching against the Dodgers this year. And I don't think the Dodgers really missed them. I don't, obviously with the Dodgers depth issues this year, maybe they would have been useful, but I don't think, the Dodgers bullpen was pretty good this year. So I don't think it would have been that big a deal. So anyway, that's all I have to say about the Rule 5 draft, which is let's watch and see what happens with the 40-man roster later today. So Vince is going to come talk about the MVP voting and the breaking news in the minor leagues that minor leaguers' housing will be paid for. So Vince will be along in a minute. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you on Monday.
BetOnline is back and better than ever. They got a brand new website, brand new web interface for the start of basketball season, and it's got more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for football and basketball action this season, so don't miss out. And right now you can get a 50% welcome bonus after your first deposit with the promo code LOCKEDON if you head over to BetOnline. So that's go to BetOnline, use the promo code LOCKEDON, and get a 50% welcome bonus after your first deposit. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yo, Dodger fans. Vince Samperio here to take you the rest of the way for this episode. I'm going to talk a little bit about MVP voting and then a little bit about the MLB finalizing things with minor leaguers and paying for them to live next year, which is a good first step into getting minor leaguers some livable wages and make it worth their while for what they do. Want to first remind you real quick, or not remind you, want to thank you for making us your first listen every single morning. Remind you to make us your first listen every morning if you don't already do so. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. So check us out more often, or tell your friends to check us out, whatever the case is. But let's go into MVP voting on the American League side. Shohei Ohtani won unanimously, which is the right decision. He deserved it more than anybody else. Not only, even if he would just had his offensive numbers, he would have been probably top 3, top 5 candidate. But then you add on 23 starts, 156 strikeouts, and 130 innings. It's a season we hadn't seen before. We maybe have seen before. Babe Ruth, I think one of his seasons, he pitched and hit to a good extent, but something we haven't seen since at least the early 1900s. So shout out to Ohtani over there. The National League, Bryce Harper took home his second NL MVP. First one with the Phillies, last one he won with the Nationals. And yeah, the Dodgers had 3 guys that received MVP votes. Trey Turner finished 5th, Max Muncy finished 10th, and Max Scherzer finished 14th. Yeah, I mean, didn't expect anyone to finish obviously top 3. They didn't have any finalists. Trey Turner, I don't know. I think if he would have came over and played out of his mind for the Dodgers the last couple months, he would have made a little bit more noise. Max Muncy was the early favorite, even into the late summer, but then kind of fell apart a little bit and didn't quite have enough toward the end of the season to make that push. Bryce Harper, the top 3 guys, the finalists: Bryce Harper, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis Jr. Soto and Harper made their runs in the second half of the season, whereas Tatis was kind of an all-season guy, but did miss a few games because of injury. I think that's ultimately what hurt him. I didn't see anything wrong with the voting. Bryce Harper, he did all he could to try and get the Phillies into the playoffs. The Phillies just weren't a good team. I believe his OPS was like 1.1 something in the second half, and the rest of the Phillies was 680 something. So, clearly he was trying to drag that team into the playoffs. It just didn't quite work out. And, real quick on Bryce Harper, he's the guy that he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at age 16. And, similar to not quite the same, but similar to LeBron, being hyped up since high school. And, you look back at LeBron and he's delivered. He's won championships. He's been MVP. He's been the best player in basketball for a long time. And Bryce Harper's not quite to that standard, but you look back now at Bryce Harper's career and he's got 2 MVPs. He's got a Rookie of the Year. He's been an All-Star 6 times, a couple Silver Sluggers. He's been one of the best players in baseball. And it got to a point where at maybe one point he was a little overrated and now he's a little underrated. But he was able to put it all together and win it there in the second half. And, props to him. One interesting thing, Brandon Crawford finished 4th, which was higher than I thought he was going to get. It was aided by 2 first place votes, or I think he had 4 first place votes, but 2 first place votes by Bay Area writers. A little bias. Every city usually has a little bias in their voting. But I don't know. It was interesting to me, the Brandon Crawford talk. He was the Giants' probably best player overall, defensively and offensively. He was very solid. But for me, it felt like, I don't know, the Dodgers, the Giants were a good team, but they didn't really have a standout guy like that. The Dodgers have had teams like that in the past where they've been really good, but just didn't quite have that standout guy. And for me, it felt like Justin Turner. Justin Turner, 2017, had very similar numbers to Brandon Crawford this year. And he played, I think, 130 games that year. So if you added the few extra games, he probably would have – Crawford led him in WAR, but I think Turner would have got pretty close in WAR had he played a few more games. But I don't know. I never thought, Justin Turner should win the MVP. So for a lot of the talk I saw for Brandon Crawford, it should have been MVP or got some up, whatever the case was. Nah, man, he's a solid guy. He's a good guy. Obviously, he had a really good year. But that doesn't mean you're an MVP for me. I never thought Justin Turner was an MVP. He might have been the MVP of the Dodgers, and he probably was the most valuable player to the Dodgers, where Brandon Crawford probably was the most valuable player to the Giants. But I don't necessarily correlate that to most valuable player in the league. And yeah, just wanted to throw my 2 cents in on that. But yeah, I think the Dodgers next year I'll have a guy in the top 3, and I'm hoping that guy is Mookie Betts, and I hope he's top 1. Mookie Betts can become the 6th player now after Bryce Harper did, the 6th player to win MVP with 2 different teams. So we'll see what happens next year. But the other thing is that we had heard rumblings, and I believe we talked about it on here, but it's MLB announced it that they will be paying, or teams will be paying for housing for minor league players, and it was way overdue, and probably aided by the fact that there was a lot of articles written this past season about players. We've heard about players, 5 to a 1 or 2 bedroom, 5 players sleeping on air mattresses, sleeping on mattresses on the floor, whatever the case is, like frat house vibes. This past year, a little bit more was made of it because they couldn't have hosts. In certain cities, there's host families that'll host players, cook them dinner, basically take them in for the summer and be kind of their family and their baseball family. They can do that. There was reports of players that were paying more in rent or hotel or whatever the case was to live than they were making in income. There was players living in RVs or in cars. There was, just a lot of stuff that for a league like Major League Baseball who took over, and now MLB is minor league baseball is under the same umbrella. They contracted some teams, they moved some stuff around, and for that to be under now an MLB's umbrella it was always weird anyways. It was like, if you're trying to have someone contribute to you in the future, but you don't give them all the pieces to be the best contributor they can be, it's kind of weird. Like, why wouldn't you want your players to be eating better food? Why wouldn't you want your players to be sleeping on a real bed and not have to worry about sleeping on a mattress or air mattress, or players can hurt their backs or whatever the case is? It never made sense to me why the minor leagues have to be a grind like that. Yeah, baseball is a grind already, and the minor leagues, they already have the grind. The grind already is going on buses, not really flying. The fact of you're not in the majors, you're not making that much money, whatever the case is. Now, the money thing, I don't know when that's going to happen, when everybody gets paid livable wages. But I guess the housing is the very first start. Now these guys don't have to spend money on apartments or whatever else they have from housing. They'll be taken care of. It's a step that's probably at one point going to lead to everybody getting paid what they should be paid. I don't even know if every team has adopted kind of what the Dodgers have and upgraded the meals. The Dodgers a few years ago made sure that meals were provided to all the teams, and good, healthy meals. And you can see the Dodgers have one of the best player development systems right now in baseball, and they've been able to have a few guys come up and be key contributors. And they have a lot of homegrown talent. Will Smith, Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager, all homegrown talent that came up in recent years. Walker Buehler, Julio Diaz. There's a bunch of different guys like that. So yeah, it's a good first step. And there's been a lot of advocacy for minor leaguers, from big leaguers, from websites, from there's been GoFundMes, there's been a lot of stuff, and finally MLB is taking notice. Finally, the teams are taking notice and realizing, they're realizing in the sense because they're opening your eyes, I guess is what it would say. I don't know if they're doing it. I don't know if these owners are doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. I think they're doing it because they got caught slipping and caught slacking, and they got called out on it, and now they got to make amends. So whatever it takes, whatever it takes to get it to all happen, and for minor leaguers to not be treated like I don't know, lower than they're below the poverty line if you're a major leaguer. And, there's a lot of players that probably had to drop out and give up on their dream that could have been all-stars or could have been, very good players in baseball, but they had to give up on their dream because either they didn't have the money or, they had a family to take care of or whatever the case is. And it's just weird to me to deprive yourself as a team of a player like that, to deprive yourself of a league of players like that, to not give these guys every chance to be the best player they can be and provide value and entertainment to your product and your league. It never made sense to me, and I'm glad it's starting to get rectified. And I look forward to seeing more things happening for minor leaguers. But this is a good first step, and yeah, I guess never late. Better late than never is the cliche term, so we'll go with that. But yeah, that's all I got for today's episode. That's all we got for the week. Next week there'll be all MLB teams announced, and maybe some signings. We're down to a couple weeks before the potential lockout, where guys won't be able to sign, so we will lose a lot of rumors. So we'll see what happens here in the next couple weeks, and if anybody signs or if the Dodgers sign anybody else. And then we'll have the 40-man roster. So that's what's going to come up next week. All MLB, 40-man roster, any other news and rumors and updates from around the league or specifically surrounding the Dodgers. I want to thank you for making us your first listen every single morning. Locked On Dodgers, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. Make sure to check out Locked On Bets for your second listen every morning. Your boy Q and expert analysis from Lee Sterling. It's your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Make sure to check out Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts. And for us, let's move on to us. Listen every morning, tell your friends and family, do all that good stuff. Want to shout out the homie Ursi, who works at California Adventure, for saying hi and checking my ID when I bought a beer and realizing that I was on the podcast that she listened to. So shout out to her. If you want to follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snydog. I'm at Vince Samperio. You can leave us a voicemail or send us a text at 323-863-5625. Or you can always send us an email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car or if you're at home, take my advice, play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.